Perfect. So maybe just by way of introduction, I can tell you a little bit about my job so you know where I'm coming from, and I'll be showing you some of the data that I work with. So at Mastercard Economics Institute, we're a group of economists and data scientists who look at the economy through the lens of the consumer. And we do that by marrying the publicly available data with Mastercard's own anonymized and aggregated sales activity. And I have to tell you, I've been doing this job for over 20 years, and it's never been more fascinating and more humbling to watch the consumers and the businesses to cope with so many rare and big events all at once. We had the pandemic, we now have high inflation, which is the highest in some 40 years in most of the markets that I cover. We have rising interest rates, the war, energy shortages, etc. So it really is a lot of going on. And what I'm going to focus on today is how consumers, as they look deeper into their wallets, cope with these changes, and especially when it comes to travel and what it means for Madrid. So hopefully I'll be able to show my presentation in a minute, because I wanted to show you some of the cool data just to get warmed up, to get started, that we work with. So what we show here on both sides of the map and the chart on the right is our Spending Pulse data. Our Spending Pulse data is our measure of national retail sales. So it's not just Mastercard spend. We do pipe in third-party survey-based estimates for other modes of payment, like cash, payments by other card providers, to get the whole economy picture. And it has the added advantage compared to official retail sales in that it's more real-time, it's updated weekly, and that we're able to zoom in, as you can see here, at the provincial level. So we can see what is happening in Madrid, and we can see what is happening in other provinces. We also covered the services sector, like restaurants and lodging, which is something that the official retail sales don't cover. So what I'm showing here with this chart on the right is spending on hotels in Madrid since the beginning of the year. And you can see that we measured this relative to pre-pandemic levels, so it's the spend in 2022 relative to the same time in 2019. And you see a big run-up in year-on-year sales around April time. We had the Real Madrid-Chelsea game at the time. I'd like to say that this has to do with the game, but it's of course very hard to tell because it overlapped with Easter holidays, and we definitely see the increase in tourism and therefore increase in hotel spending there. Then the spending softened, and then we had this incredible rise for Madrid Pride, which peaked at 66% above pre-pandemic levels just towards the end of the Pride. What's also interesting is that those few days before, which was when the NATO summit happened in Madrid, were relatively quiet from hotel spend perspective. And I guess that could be explained by the fact that, when you have all these senior leaders in town, you have security restrictions, and therefore it may actually discourage some of the tourists coming in. Now I flicked the chart to spending on restaurants, and it's really a similar picture. So big run-up around Easter, around the Real Madrid-Chelsea game, softening as we head towards the end of the second quarter, and then a big run-up again during Madrid Pride. So Madrid Pride is really good for Madrid spending. And what you can see here is how spending in Madrid in terms of rank compared to other provinces has evolved. So I'm showing here June 29th, and spending on restaurants, Madrid was 19th compared to the rest of Spain in terms of 3 year-on-year growth, or compared to pre-pandemic growth rates. And if I go to July 9th, you can see that it has climbed up to number 9. Now, you can still say number 9. These are growth rates, so these are changes from pre-pandemic levels, and obviously Madrid is big, so in percentage terms, it's hard to grow as fast as some smaller places. So I'll flick it to sales in terms of euros, and you can see that Madrid was second, Barcelona was first. So as you would expect, in terms of euros pulled in, those two cities are leading the spend on restaurant and indeed hotel spending in Spain. Okay, Let's dive in quickly into the bigger macro picture. What I'm showing here, no surprise, you're all probably familiar with these charts, which is the insane rise in inflation that we have experienced across advanced economies. So we had Spanish inflation peaking in July at almost 11%. It has moderated since. And similarly in the Eurozone, in the UK, in the United States, everywhere inflation is around or just below 10%. Now, where does it come from? One reason it has gone up so much has been the pandemic. This rise in inflation in 2021 was really due to what's shown in a chart here, which is supply chain pressures generated by the pandemic. And in fact, they were generated because we couldn't travel. And you may wonder, how is that possible? Well, the reason is that normally in advanced economies in the United States, across Europe, in Australia, consumers spend most of their money on services, on going to restaurants, on traveling, on getting haircuts, on the services economy, not buying goods. But what happened during the pandemic, since all of these services were off limits, people were spending disproportionate amount of their money sitting on their bums in their homes, in front of the computer, and ordering stuff. And the global supply chains could not keep up with this rise in demand for goods. And at the same time, of course, you had the factory shortages, you had port shutdowns, which have further exacerbated these pressures. You can see these pressures have now eased. They're still elevated, but they're easing, and that's because consumers have rotated their spending back into services as the economy reopened. Earlier this year, of course, we had the war in Ukraine, so now I'm showing inflation against energy inflation, and of course, like suddenly the line looks flat because it has been the main driver of inflation in Europe. And the reason, again, I highlight this is because it is important for travel. Not only does it feed into travel costs via higher fuel prices, but also energy and food inflation is the bad kind of inflation, because when your energy and food bills rise, you have less money to spend on fun things like travel. Except it didn't really happen. Consumers have been relatively resilient. And what I show here is consumer spending. This is showing August data, but the chart looks very similar since the beginning of the year. In Spain, in Germany, in different European countries, in the United States, and in Madrid, across different segments. And you can see that consumers are no longer spending on stuff, on all these things that they bought during the pandemic: electronics, home improvement, home furniture, all of these are flashing red. They're spending on fuel and convenience and on grocery. Let me just pull it up. So you can see grocery is also green because you have to eat. But they're especially spending on lodging and restaurants. So they pull back spending on goods, they rotate into spending on essentials like fuel and convenience, and on lodging and restaurants, which has been really strong this year, supported by a huge rebound in travel. So here I show travel bookings. I'm sure you're all familiar with the huge release of the pent-up demand for travel that we have seen this year. We have business bookings shown in red. So this has been a surprise that the business travel has picked up as much as it has. These are bookings originating in Europe, leisure bookings as well. That started to come down as people were no longer booking their summer holidays, but you can see that in August, they started to rise again as people are booking their winter holidays, their fall break. So we have been surprised by the resilience of this pent-up demand for travel continuing despite the fact that we're living in a very difficult economic environment, and that the prospects for the winter, for the economic slowdown, for continued high inflation and rising interest rates should be forcing consumers technically to pull back on spending. But we see that instead they're making other trade-offs in order to maintain spending on these fun categories. Finally, I'm just going to close by showing you again spending on hotels in Madrid. And here I just wanted to highlight the little green dots everywhere show spending on hotels around Spain. In August, it was 70% up compared to last year. This was more than in Barcelona, which was up for 67%, or Palma, Mallorca, 44% up. This is actually surprising given that, this is the hot spot for the August tourism season. So Madrid has done relatively well. And the reason it has done well is because Madrid does attract the more affluent spenders. And so maybe even if fewer people come to Madrid, they spend more. And what we show here is looking at card spending by affluent consumers, which we measure as holders of our premium cards. And you can see that in Madrid in 2022, in August, it represented almost a third of spending in the city compared to a fifth in the rest of Spain. What's also interesting is that Madrid is more techy. There's more online spending taking place in Madrid compared to the rest of Spain when it comes to hotel spending. So these are interesting trends because they do tell us a lot about longevity of the travel recovery in Madrid. By attracting more affluent travelers, the prospect as we're heading into economic slowdown is better for Madrid because affluent travelers are those who have more savings that they accumulated during the pandemic, which act as a cushion against high prices and rising interest rates. They're also relatively less impacted by high inflation because by definition they're more affluent and therefore food and fuel prices don't bother them as much as the low-budget travelers, which again bodes well for the prospects of the recovery as we head into the winter in travel in Madrid in particular. And again, the increasing convenience of online spending is also just adding this extra edge to the city. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to leave it here, but I'll be around during coffee break and during lunch, so I'm happy to take any questions if any of you want to discuss any of these topics further. Thank you.